are rolling. Hello, my name is Kevin Lynn, and I'm one of the co-founders of the Center for Progressive Urban Politics. And today we are joined by Joe Guzzardi, who happens to be calling in from Puerto Rico, where he's going to be spending the next several days surveying the damage wrought by Hurricane Maria and the island's continuing struggle to pick up the pieces from this disaster. But before that, for those who may be unfamiliar with CFPUP, the Center for Progressive Urban Politics, we're an organization dedicated to opening up dialogue by informing and supporting policies that help build more livable communities, whether that community is a neighborhood, town, city, state, and even a country. We start by putting aside divisive labels such as Democrat versus Republican or liberal versus conservative, and we ask ourselves, what is the most prudent course of action based on things such as common sense, tradition, and a dose of moderation? To that end, on a regular basis, we bring our audience a variety of content that comes to us in the form of blog posts, articles, videos, and podcasts that inform local electorates about the issues that affect them, be they national or local. So, as I'd mentioned, we got a great podcast here today, and I am joined by Joe Guzzardi. And Joe is a writer and columnist with a weekly syndication to some 800 newspapers. He writes on a wealth of topics to include economics, the environment, overpopulation, and labor. And he's a native Californian. He taught English as a second language in the California public school system for 2 decades. And that was after a successful career on Wall Street. And he's, through the years, worked with several nonprofits and was even a candidate for the governor of California in the 2003 recall Gray Davis special election. But now Joe and his wife live in Pennsylvania. And so without any further ado, let's talk to Joe and find out what is going on in Puerto Rico. Joe, welcome to the podcast.
Kevin, thank you so much for inviting me to participate in your podcast. And it's very great timing to be in Puerto Rico because there is so much going on that I want to share with you and your audience. Things that are going on that I believe are not getting the appropriate amount of coverage, not the appropriate amount of concern in Washington, D.C. in Congress. But before I get into that...
Right, because Joe, you have a background with Puerto Rico, and it would be awesome for you to talk to, give our audience some of your background with that island.
Yes, I do. I had lived in Puerto Rico many, many years ago, 50 years ago, actually. My father was transferred to the island, and my family moved here. I went to high school in Puerto Rico. My son was born in Puerto Rico, so I have strong emotional ties to the island. And after I left for the final time as a resident, it was in the mid-1960s, I had often thought about returning, to go back and visit the places that I had spent so much time at. But I also knew that Puerto Rico was changing dramatically. At the time that my family first moved to the island, Cuba was the destination of choice for snowbirds, and Puerto Rico was relatively an undeveloped paradise.
Really?
But after Cuba, the development started big time, luxury resort hotels, condos.
That would be after the Castro regime came to power in Cuba then.
Right, that's right. And it was no longer possible to visit Cuba and spend winter months there. So Puerto Rico became the place of choice for people looking to escape harsh winter weather. And the island quickly became very developed. And I just didn't want to go back because I had so many fond memories of the undeveloped Puerto Rico. But when
Mm-hmm.
Hurricane Maria struck, it just gnawed at me, Kevin. Wow, what is happening in Puerto Rico? What is happening on the island where I had so many wonderful and fond memories? What are happening to the Puerto Rican people that I always had a warm spot in my heart for? So I decided.
But Joe, if you listen to the President of the United States, you'd think everything was hunky dory. They got hit by a hurricane, and we're down there. We're making progress with regard to the reconstruction. I mean, someone's lying somewhere.
Well, it's all part of this terrible roller coaster that the Puerto Rican people have been subjected to. Trump says, well, FEMA can't stay down there forever. And of course, everybody is terrified at the prospects of a pullout because there's so much progress still to be made. And then 2 days later, there's another announcement that says, okay, well, we take it back. We're not going to pull out after all. But it just is clear to me, crystal clear to me, that the United States Congress does not consider this to be the human tragedy that it is, that it clearly is. People living in the central parts of Puerto Rico have been without power now for 4 months. Power, you're talking about elderly people, you're talking about sick people, you're talking about people that don't have much money and don't have any luxuries of life to begin with, and now they're without basic necessities. So
to kind of put it in perspective, Joe, the population of Puerto Rico is about 3.4 million people. The land mass is roughly the size of Connecticut. Now, interestingly enough, that's about the population size of Connecticut. But in terms of the poverty you were talking about, the poverty rate of Puerto Rico is probably twice that of the state of Mississippi, about 44%. That's enormous.
Yeah.
So
Kevin, Puerto Rico has always been burdened by high poverty rates and by high welfare dependency. So again, you're talking about this natural disaster coming on top of the existing poverty level, the existing dependence on welfare, and the bankruptcy that the island declared, I don't know, whatever it was, 6 or 8 months or so ago. So Puerto Rico, remember, United States citizens at birth, qualified to hold United States passports if they want to apply for one, and in my view, totally ignored, except for the occasional sort of de rigueur statement made by a Hispanic legislator in Congress to the effect that, wow, it's really terrible down there. And then they go off to whatever other pet project they may have.
Yeah, they just don't seem to be hearing anything out of Congress about.
No, it's a non-starter. So you're talking about a Congress that is literally obsessed with what to do about DACAs, illegal immigrants, and in virtual total disregard for what to do about suffering U.S. citizens in Puerto Rico.
Wow.
Yeah. It's bad.
You talked about the poverty. So when you look at where we've had disaster strike in 2017, Houston, for instance, got flooded. Florida, hammered. But there are people. The people there have the resources to deal with that. There are insurance companies, estimators showing up, helping them. But when you have a society where there's a 44% poverty rate, I mean, those resources don't exist. It's
I mean,
the population.
the,
Go ahead.
yeah, the people that are most dramatically affected by this, as I said earlier, they live in the mountainous areas of Puerto Rico, and the roads that rescue teams would have to travel to get to them are difficult to navigate. You're not talking about super highways or anything like that. But the people themselves haven't been blessed in their lives with learning how to navigate the system. Learning how to get a hold of the types of emergency people in the government, either the federal government or the Puerto Rican government, to get help. They're dependent on people bringing help to them. And it's very discouraging and disappointing to find that certainly the federal government and maybe to a lesser degree, probably to a lesser degree, the local government here in Puerto Rico, but their hands are tied too in a way. They don't have any money. So in the meantime, there's about 1 million people. I mean, estimates vary on how many people are actually still without power, but the commonly agreed upon figure is about 1 million. And again, this is by far the longest power outage in United States history, sustained power outage in the United States history. And it just isn't on the radar in Congress. And it's indefensible that it's not, if not the number one topic, certainly in the top 3. And it certainly should prioritize what to do about several million illegal aliens.
Right, because it seems that Congress is preoccupied with non-citizens as opposed to its citizens.
Totally. Hey, there's no denying that. There is absolutely no denying that Congress is literally obsessed with what to do about these illegal aliens. And if there's anybody in the audience that doubts that, all they have to do is turn on the evening news or pick up any newspaper, and the deferred action DACAs are in the headlines, and they're one of the leading news stories on any television broadcast, and that is night after night after night and morning after morning after morning.
Now is Congressman Gutierrez, he's of Puerto Rican descent, correct?
Yeah, he was born in Puerto Rico.
From Illinois.
I believe he was. Right, I believe he was born in Puerto Rico, but he certainly is of Puerto Rican heritage.
I mean, I don't understand. I mean, why is he not? This is what you'd expect him to storm out of the State of the Union.
Sure. I mean, you would think that this would be an issue that he would be extremely vocal on, the apparent disinterest in his fellow congressmen figuring out a meaningful and immediate solution to the Puerto Rican tragedy. He's willing to get himself arrested over DACAs. I think he's been arrested. I'm quite sure he's been arrested multiple times over the last decade in various protests, and here, I'm sure somewhere on his website there's a statement about it, but it just isn't. As I said before, these aren't meaningful statements, Kevin. These are token, gratuitous references to the tragedy in Puerto Rico, but without any real muscle or compassion behind them.
Now, with regard to the size of the tragedy, now I was told that the death toll was about 100. Have there been deaths? A number of deaths because of the lack of utilities and access to drinking water and food and medicine?
Yes, the death toll is another one of the really remarkable tragedies in this story. The original death toll was said to be about 65 people, but now as investigators have learned more, that toll is now been set at about 1,200, which is a very long way from 65.
Wow.
And the governor has been called out on the carpet on this, Governor Rosello, and he said, well, you know, this was our original estimate, and we're continuously updating it, and so on and so forth. But that story isn't washing here on Puerto Rico because it's just to locals, to Puerto Ricans, it's just they take it as evidence of the government's incompetence.
Mm-hmm. And is it, in your view, is it government incompetence?
Certainly, government incompetence has been part of this. I mean, they have the government, previous governorship administrations have run Puerto Rico into bankruptcy. Many thousands of Puerto Ricans are leaving the island, which has sort of a dual bad effect. You have Puerto Ricans leaving and taking their tax contributions with them, and you have them relocating in Florida, which has its own problems with overpopulation and school crowding and a bunch of other social issues. So now the Puerto Rican governments, the local municipal governments, have to cope with adopting new residents into their society, which in today's America is extremely challenging.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting. Now, how
we'd
long?
like what?
Go ahead.
I was just going to say what we'd like to see, and if anybody in your audience has ties to Puerto Ricans or who has visited Puerto Rico at any time and have fond memories of the time that you spent here, you know, get in touch with your congressman and say, look, what's going on here? Are we, these individuals, these Puerto Ricans, are our fellow United States citizens, and they are suffering greatly, and you are completely ignoring their plights and the difficult lives, the harrowing lives that they are living.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, that's actually a great thing to point out to the audience. It's a way to take action, because ultimately,
get involved.
Elected people, they need to see the movement. They need to hear from their constituents, or else it's just going to be business as usual. Joe, I have some questions I'd like to ask you. But, you know, when you look at the future of Puerto Rico, where do you see things going in the short term and then the long term?
That's a great question, and it's a question that Puerto Ricans on the ground are asking themselves. I've only been here a day, so I'm just beginning to get out and interact with the people and ask them questions about Puerto Rico. I see a very slow time here for what is normally the peak of the tourist season. I don't see a lot of action around. I've asked a few people that work at hotels. I said, well, things are slow, and if it weren't for the government workers that we've been housing here instead of tourists, that things would be even more slow. Puerto Ricans, Kevin, are I have found them to be extremely devoted to the island and to their culture and to their heritage, and it's difficult for them to pack up and leave. And I've always felt, you know, the Puerto Ricans that I've known from when I lived in New York, many Puerto Ricans in New York, that they were, you know, just wanted to be in Puerto Rico more than they wanted to be in the United States. So they're reluctant to leave, but at some point, you know,
economic
they have to
necessity
pull
is
up
going to force them to do it. Much like you look at Ireland during the potato famine, and then later when there were simply no opportunities for young people, they had to go to where the opportunities were, and it's kind of tragic. And do you think that's partly because after the the rise, Cuba became a communist state. That's Puerto Rico became a tourist economy, and that in itself, either it creates this highly polarized economy where you have a few people that have a lot and a lot of people down making service level job.
Yes, no doubt. No doubt. I mean, Puerto Rico is not a country that has a lot of economic opportunity. You know, there aren't a lot of factories being built, and there's a small agricultural base, but not enough to provide jobs for millions of people. So tourism came in and it was huge. And as I said earlier, many luxury hotels and golf courses and so forth provided jobs for a lot of people. And when that industry softens, either back in 2008 during the mortgage meltdown in the United States, which also affected Puerto Rico, but which obviously gave Americans a lot less spending money to take high-end vacations. And now with Hurricane Maria, it leaves people without many options. But the question is twofold, because we're moving to Florida, but then what? You know, I mean, where are the jobs in Florida? You know, or for that matter, where are manufacturing jobs anywhere across the United States? So they'll move to Florida. There'll be many of them will be bilingual, so they'll be able to land jobs in the leisure travel industry there, but they'll be displaced from their homes, and their costs of living will be higher in Florida than they were in Puerto Rico for sure. So it remains to be seen how it will work out in the end for Puerto Ricans that leave.
Well, it's interesting because I'm here in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, where roughly 30% of the residents in the city are of Puerto Rican heritage. It's called it's one of the names for the city of Lancaster is the Spanish Rose. And I'm definitely going to make an effort to get out and connect with that community and see how they're coping, how their relatives are coping with it. I know.
Yeah, that would be great to talk with them and see what's going on. I expect to be able to explore that topic a lot more over the coming days as I, get a chance to interact with more people. But we've been talking almost exclusively here today about the poorer people up on the mountains. But this was a tragedy that affected everybody in Puerto Rico at the outset. I had a ride in from the airport yesterday with a woman that, I don't know anything about her background, but from all outward appearances, she looked to be solidly middle class, drove a middle class car and spoke real good English. And she said that she and her family were without electricity for 34 days. And so,
wow.
So, that's huge. It's just impossible to imagine for you or me what that would be like. We're irritated when the power goes out for 15 minutes during a thunderstorm. And these guys are without power for 34 days. It's just unthinkable.
Wow. And it's interesting, a natural disaster like this does not discriminate. I mean, look at what happened in California, up in the area of Montecito, just south of Santa Barbara. I mean, Oprah's mansion just narrowly escaped a landslide. So, Mother Nature doesn't discriminate. When she launches, certainly if you're wealthier and you have some means, you'll be able to deal with it probably a little more effectively and quicker. But
right. Well, I must say that the Puerto Ricans that I have talked to, although they have been a few in number because I'm just starting out.
Right, you just got
they
there.
have been they have been extremely positive and upbeat. You know, they're saying, okay, this has been bad, but we are getting through this. I mean, again, I'm in the capital city, so for most people, the worst is over, and it's probably easier for them to say, okay, you know, onward and upward. Easier for them certainly than the people in the mountains, but there does seem to be a very positive attitude among them, and you just have to hope that this works its way, that the Puerto Rican tragedy, the loss of lives and property, works its way onto the congressional agenda, and that it gets the attention that it deserves.
Wow, we can only hope at this point. Well, Joe, thanks so much for joining me today and sharing your story with our audience. And
a pleasure.
Again, you've only just gotten to Puerto Rico, had a little bit of time to look around, and perhaps over the next few days, we might be able to either get together again on a podcast or have
sure, that would be wonderful.
To the CF Pup blogs, updating us as to your experiences and interactions there.
Yes, I'll be heading out. Into the countryside this weekend, and I'll have a much more updated view of what's going on, where the suffering seems to be at its worst. So I'm happy to share that at any time.
Fantastic. Well, again, Joe, thanks so much. And to my audience, again, we've just heard from Joe Guzzardi, a writer and columnist who's syndicated to over 800 newspapers across the country, giving us his initial take on what he's finding on the ground there in Puerto Rico. And again, Joe, the fact that you do have a Puerto Rican story in terms of having lived there many years ago. You have an affinity for the island, and so it's really great getting your perspective. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Kevin, for having me. My pleasure.
Bye-bye.